G'day. My name is Lenore Parker. I'm an Yaegl Aboriginal lady from Maclean. I tell this story about my mother when she brought me home from hospital, from the Maclean hospital over to the island, Ulgundahi Island, and she said, "Now, Pet, when I brought you home here, your first cradle was the top of a chest of drawers, and your first home was a little tin hut, and she said, not long after you were born, there was this giant flood that came, and so they had to take us, all the community, the homes, the families that were on the island at the time, they took us over to Ashby, where there was higher ground, and she said the government gave us these big, giant army tents, so each family had one, and so we lived in those until our dad built a little tin shack, and so we lived over at Ashby until just after my 8th birthday. I remember that we then came back from Ashby over to the island. And so living life over at both at Ashby, that's where I grew up to be this little toddler and this little girl. And actually it was at Ashby at the age of 8 that I said yes to God, sitting under a gum tree on a log, and there we were talking about God, and so the reason why I gave my heart to Jesus was when I heard the scripture, John 3:16, for God so loved the world, and I thought, oh, okay. So as a child, I didn't have really any deep thing, but I thought, oh yes, okay. So I'll follow this God. I followed God, but it was my people who were there with me at the time. My aunt and my Uncle Claude, he was the pastor of our community, but it was every Sunday you'd have a different group of people coming from the mainland, Maclean, over to the island, to Ashby. And then when we moved back to the island, they came over there. So we had different denominations coming over there. So I didn't really grow up in a denomination. But it was there that, surrounded by family, and it was family that fed and nurtured me as a child. And so I always say that the church was my home. My first church was our home, the family home. And so sitting on the dirt floor in this little tin shack with, potato bags for window curtains and little those sheets of tin as the door. So, but every night, sitting on the dirt floor with Mum and Dad, and so we'd sit there kneeling and saying this beautiful prayer, that gentle Jesus. Do you know that one?
Yes, I had to say that one when I was little, at bedtime.
Gentle Jesus. And so that was, the love that I was surrounded by, firstly with my parents, but then with the rest of the family around us. Our grandparents and our aunts and our uncles were there, and our cousins. For me, it became this place. It was a fun place. We can run and play in the bush. Yeah, we enjoyed the freedom, but I had no idea that what our parents were going through, because they were the ones who were more like they were placed over. They weren't allowed to go where they wanted. Yeah. They had to go where they were placed and make the home theirs. Yes, and then when we moved back to the island, Ulgundahi Island, by that stage the school on the island was shut down, and so we had to come to Maclean Public School, where I went. I started at Ashby and then I continued on until I went right through to high school.
As a teenager, where was God for you as a teenager?
Well, I still went to church at with the people on the island, and then when we moved to Maclean here, then it was the Free Presbyterian Church that we came to. The Free Presbyterian minister's wife, Mrs. Webster, she would take Mum and all the women out to Bible studies, and so the kids would go to the youth group there. We'd have such a wonderful time, when you're with kids your own age, and it was there. But but Mr. and Mrs. Webster, they were beautiful people. It was never, I guess, the denomination wasn't important. It was never pushed on us. So it was the love of these people who came over and their gentleness that got that fed us and fed our parents too. Yeah, so it was for me. It was as I said earlier, growing up as this Aboriginal girl. Firstly, I didn't know I was Aboriginal because your parents, your family there, and even though the farmers were white, but I never really saw there was a difference between black and white. I didn't, my eyes were, I don't know, it wasn't open to, I guess, things that were different. It was just a beautiful, I guess, very, as children, very, very naive or innocent, I think, is the better word. Yeah.
Which is a beautiful way to be.
Oh.
And that your parents protected you from the pain that they were going through, and just allowed you to have this beautiful childhood.
Beautiful place, and and it was we had no idea that about the welfare board and things like that, the Aborigines Welfare Board, and how the people who lived on the island, like Mum and them, how I could remember every once a month, I think, that they'd come over because the manager would come and he'd bring some doctors or nurses over there, and that's when all the kids would have to line up to get these big tablets about as big as your finger, and they were for worms. Then you would get a glass or a big spoonful of castor oil, and then you would have this. They would give you half an orange or something to take that taste away. But one of the things that, when they would come, and as I said, they'd come there once a month, and when the manager would bring these health people over, they'd come, and so Mum and them, all the parents, would get the sheep dip. I think it's sheep dip. That's fennel, and the place would just reek of this. So wherever you went, from one house to another, you could smell the fennel. And so when I smell that smell, it takes me back to that place and the memories of that place. And so you would see all the manager and the nurse and that, our homes, Mum and Dad's homes, all the parents' home on the island, they were spotless. The washing would have been done the day before because there was a well on the island, and so the fathers would fill the tub, the copper actually, fill it up with water so that the women could wash all these sheets. The sheets had to be white, and then it was rinsed and dipped in these blue bags, I think called Bluo or something like that. Anyway, and then sometimes when they'd starch our, the uniforms to go to school, they would be so stiff that you couldn't get into them. But for us, it was very. I mean, I didn't know that story. I knew what I'd seen and what I smelt and that, but I didn't know the underlying issues with this. And then when I learnt that after we'd left the island and we'd heard that the stories about when they would come over to the island, the manager, the health people would come over. That's when they would walk into every home and they would run their fingers, looking at the beds, the kitchen, the bedrooms and that, and they'd walk in and they'd see if there was any clean blankets, any clean sheets. And so you could imagine like how our parents and grandparents would have felt, like no dignity.
No.
They weren't treated with respect and any dignity, and that would have been for a lot of Aboriginal people right around New South Wales, I'm sure. And so when you think of that, how they were treated, and like my mum and her era, their homes were spotless because they knew that they had to be spotless just in case the manager would walk into their new home, out of Hillcrest and that. So I think there's a lot of things that I know there has a lot of things that has not been told that really do need to be more, told so that the people's stories can get out and just show the rest of the community just how we were treated. And so I guess now we are the ones who have the opportunity to tell these stories, and our kids, they're not holding back. They're telling the stories, whether it be through art, music, song and dance, And like life on the island was very much, if you didn't go to church, it was the Aboriginal Inland Mission, I think, at the time. The manager on the island, he was also the teacher. And if the kids didn't, like Mum and them, didn't go to church on the Sunday school, when came Monday, they'd get us the stick for not turning up to church. So if you're talking about a church where God is love, it certainly was not there. And I believe that has a lot to do now with why, pardon me, a lot of Aboriginal people don't go to church, because they saw how their parents and grandparents were taught. So there was no freedom for them either at Ashby or on the island, even though I thought we were free. And I see now that the Ulgundahi Island, I call that now the sacred heartbeat of the Yaegl people, because even though a lot of us now didn't live on the island, but those whose parents lived there, they told their children the stories. But I'm so grateful that we did grow up there and have that opportunity. Yeah. I'm glad I grew up in that era, because for me it's made me who I am now, And so I can reflect and look back on how our old people lived. I said, living under that, where the freedom was, living under this gum tree, sitting on a log, and hearing things, hearing stories, yeah.
So what brought you to the Anglican Church?
Well, that's another story, isn't it? It all started when I was in 1987, 88. Because my marriage had broken down, and so we came home, and then one night I woke up with, I didn't know I was having a panic attack, but oh my goodness, it scared me. And so they took me to the hospital. lying in the bed there, and then I had this beautiful lady from here, the Anglican Church, and I said, oh, I saw this priest coming around with the praying, with his collar, and I said to her, I saw him praying with her. I said, do you think he would pray with me? And she said, oh, yes, I'm sure. He'd love to. So anyway, she called him over and she said, this is, she would like some prayers. And so at the time it was the Reverend Maclean, who was our priest, the priest here in the Anglican Church. And so for me he was Jesus who came and did the anointing on me. The bishop asked for a gathering of some of the Aboriginal people to go to the cathedral in Grafton to have this for a clergy conference. And at the time it was this looking at Aboriginal issues. And I think Robert Draffin, he was the Aboriginal Affairs Officer for this diocese at the time. And so anyway, it was Don Carrington, who was a lecturer at Nungalinya College in Darwin, and then Fred Wandmaker, who was the Anglican National Social Justice person for the Anglican Church, and they were the two guest speakers. And so we went. I was invited to go then because Mark invited Mum and them to go. And so we went up and I went there with them. And that was my first time in any Anglican church that I went to the cathedral. The interesting thing for me was, as I can recall, was when it came to having sort of like talking about church in the cathedral. And then I started to recall my first experience over at Ashby. And then after we were outside, sitting under the jacaranda tree then they said, okay, well, we're going now into, say, some prayers in the chapels, one of the little chapels in Grafton. And whilst I was in there, I thought, I could feel like as if my spirit within me was just being crushed in the cathedral, in that little chapel there. And I thought, okay, so that was up there. Then I came home after that week, 3 days up there in Grafton. I came home, and then by this time I walked with me and my 3 girls to the service where Mark was, because I met the priest, and then I met his beautiful wife, Judy, and they had 3 little daughters. So I had 3 little daughters too. So that's where it started for me, coming here. Yeah. But firstly, walking down that laneway, walking down the laneway, having a panic attack coming here. So, yeah, but no.
It obviously went okay.
It did.
It came in.
So that was in 88,
Okay.
Yeah.
So when did you start hearing a call to ordained ministry?
Well, I didn't know. What does that look like?
Yeah.
What does it look like? What I can explain is that in 1988, when there was that was when the bicentenary year was on, and so they had this tribe coming from Cairns, the Jupukai people. They came down, this tribe, and they were invited down here to our local community to do some things with us here, like some performances. So anyway, they came down. Firstly, they did their welcome dance here, and that was good from what I could remember. It was because we're all sitting up there at Hillcrest and out on the lawn area, and then they did the dance, and then they started telling or showing some of the things, because we never had that. I never grew up knowing about that, like the traditional dancing and things like that, because that wasn't allowed on our island, so everything like that was taken away. But up here in 1988, it was when they did the farewell dance, and they said, now we're going to do the farewell dance. We're going to sweep clean If we brought anything into your community, we say sorry. We ask you to forgive us. And so now we're going to do this dance to take away any unclean spirits that we may have, brought here. And then it was when they said that, that's when I felt the spirit within me, the warmth in my heart. And so I knew something then had happened. And because, as I said, I didn't know the Aboriginal way of worshipping, and so it was this, when I'd heard that and felt that, and when they went out dancing, and it was so powerful that, that brought me to, and then it wasn't long after that, in 1992, I think there were conversations going on in the Anglican Church, whether it was at General Synod level, where they were looking at how do we bring the Aboriginal people, the Aboriginal voice, the Indigenous voice into the Anglican Church. And so then it was Robert Draffin, who, as I spoke earlier, was our Aboriginal Affairs Officer, when he came and he gathered us, some of my elders, to come. And he said, I want to invite you to come and have a cup of tea or coffee at the cafe, because they're looking to get this group of Aboriginal Christians together to go down to Sydney. And so I went along and I said, oh, but Robert, I'm a young Christian, and I told my older Christians, cousins, and so we waited and no one turned up. And then he said to me, Lenore, he said, well, you're here. And I said, Robert, I've only been a Christian about 3 years. And he said, Lenore, Jesus taught his disciples for 3 years and then he sent them out. And so that's when I went down there to become a member of this NATSIAC body, the National Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Anglican Council, even though it wasn't the Torres Strait Islanders, they weren't included at the time because they were still trying to work out, because you must remember, like, they were up there with their Torres Strait Islander people doing Torres Strait Islander business in the church, and why should they go to Sydney to join up with these other, Anglican Christians in Sydney? Why should they go there? So that was where it all started, with the NATSIAC body. So at the time when we're all in this place, it was at the University of New South Wales, and it was John Harris who was one of them. I think the Reverend John Harris, he was there with members of ABM and other General Synod people. I know Bishop Clyde Wood, Bishop Arthur Malcolm, they were the two bishops, and then Colleen Hodge and some other Aboriginal supporters from Melbourne and that, who came to support us. And so whilst we were there, we started talking about issues in the Anglican Church. And then I think may have been the second meeting that I went to in Sydney that they started talking about the ministry and ordination. And I wasn't even looking at anything like that, because I didn't know. had no idea that I was being called into any form of ministry. And because all what I did before as a nurse, I didn't call it a ministry. I called it that was my work, my job, what I did. And so when I did this down there with the group of people, and I heard the men started talking about women cannot be ordained for ministry. So at that time you could hear and I thought you could hear both sides coming, like with this confronting, words, very strong words that were spoken there at the time. And there'd be, some of the women would be in tears. And I said, well, I know I just got up and I said, well, God makes us all in his image, male and female. And I said, I believe that God is calling us. He's not interested in whether you're male or female. He wants, if you've got the heart and the passion, he knows, because then he's called us all into the ministry. So that was my first experience of anything like that. And that was with my local, all the Aboriginal people who were there. It wasn't in the wider church. So here they were talking like that in this small little group that I was a part of. So that led to very interesting time. Yeah. And so from there, I'll keep on going.
Yeah.
So from there, the next year, 1994, our meeting was in Darwin, and it was the National Aboriginal Anglican Council that we left. We met up there, and then we met with the traditional people, traditional men, and who were in the church were priests and deacons. And upon meeting them, I was so, because that was my first interaction with them, and we were so humbled and proud of these men who were so proud, of their position in the Anglican Church. And it was whilst we were there that we had the meeting, and then after the meeting, Bishop Arthur Malcolm took us out to Ulgundahi College for praise and worship one Saturday evening. He took us out there and we had this great time of singing and dancing. The didgeridoo was playing and the clapsticks, and the didgeridoo, that was when I saw the scriptures were danced into the church, being played by the didgeridoo and the clapsticks. And I saw that for the first time. And the people there, so we were all up and dancing. Little did I know what was to come next. And so that was a Saturday, and they were having their synod meetings, the Northern Territory synod meetings, out, just sitting out on the grass with the rest of the Northern Territory clergy and that. And that's how they did their business. And so the next day, on the Sunday, when we all went to worship at the Darwin Cathedral, the men were all robed in their white, and we were sitting in the front row, so proud. All the NAC members then, sitting there so proud because we saw our men walking in with their, with their little green book, the prayer book, and walking in and with their, the gap, the garb, what are they called? Albs, the albs on, and their stoles. And anyway, we were sitting there, and then I felt good. We all felt good and proud. And then when the bishop, he welcomed us up there to the cathedral, and then it was when they opened the prayer book that the God that I had heard, the voice of the God that I had heard from my traditional people, it wasn't in the church. It was out in out of the church, out in the the lawns and at Ulgundahi College. It was out there, and so when they opened it, the spirit within me just groaned. And so when I came out of that service, and then flew back to Sydney for a Women's Commission meeting that I was on, and started to tell the story, because as it was at that time, it was the printing of a new prayer book for Australia. And so as I was sharing I was in the imagery section with Peter Burke and Rosina Weaver, who was a priest from Canberra Goulburn, and I was in that imagery section with them. And so as I started to tell my story about what I'd witnessed in Darwin and the voice that I'd heard of my people telling their story about their God, their daddy God, this God of the ancient dream time. And I thought, oh, wow, what does he look, this God looks like? Because he was their daddy.
Mm-hmm.
He was their daddy God. So he's the big boss. He's the big boss. And so when I came to Sydney and started telling this story, and then when we had the reporting back of the meeting that we'd been formed as a group, and when we came back, Peter Burke, who is now he was with Anglican, and he's in Adelaide now. And so when we came back and to report, and Peter Burke, he read the words, and I said, Peter, that was beautiful. Those words were beautiful. Then he said, Lenore, they were your words. So I didn't write the prayer. I spoke the prayer. The Spirit spoke. Yeah, I always say that was when my tongue became the pen to write the story.
So that's how we came to have that amazing
God of Holy Dreaming Prayer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the story. That's the story of that. I was so angry when I heard that the Liturgical Commission at the time didn't accept the prayer itself, because they thought it was written by a feminist, one of the feminist women in the Women's General Synod Commission. And so I mean, I didn't even know what a feminist was in those days.
So it doesn't strike me as a feminist prayer at all.
No, but see, it was Mother Earth.
Yeah, okay, so...
When God spoke, right from that very beginning, at the dawn of creation, when the gum tree grew, and he spoke and the gum tree grew. And Mother Earth was there, right in that very first paragraph. And so it was that word, Mother Earth, that was the blockage there. And so anyway, moving on from that, so I came home to Maclean High School and I wrote this letter. I went to the English department. I got my friend to write. And she said, Lenore, she said, I can see you are so angry. You write, here's the pen, you just go and write. And so I wrote a letter to, I think it was Laurie Bartlett at the time, the Anglican Commission. I wrote this letter to him about, how can you not, I don't know what I wrote, but anyway, it was more, sort of, and if you don't know, I will gladly teach you. Because here you are, you're not accepting the spirituality of the people here in this first peoples in this place, or something like that. And so anyway, I wrote this letter, and then Bishop Philip Aspinall, when they put the prayer together to send to the Liturgical Commission to look at if it was theologically correct, And at that time, I had no idea what theological correct meant, and so anyway, they looked at it and they sent it. And so when I got the response from the Liturgical Commission, and that's when I really wrote what I wanted to say. But then also at the time we were invited to, NATSIAC, the body, was invited to go to open the 1995 General Synod in Melbourne. And so they wanted us to walk with to do the welcome to country. And so we were there walking into the church, and then there was a fight then with the Dean of the Melbourne Cathedral and us. Who came first? Who came first? The Dean wanted the cross to lead us in. And Gloria said, no, our people were here first. So the smoking ceremony and the clapsticks have to lead us in. And so that was then when they said yes to that, we were allowed to go on then into that. And then listening the next day or so, we were gathered at one of the grammar schools that was so dark, and the bricks were really dark, and it was raining, and it was very dismal. You had the clergy would sit in the middle, but then you'd have all the ones who were writing and that.
Yeah.
They'd be up there. Then all us, the visitors, we were sitting up there. And so it came to the debate now about having this Aboriginal prayer being offered in its full form. And because wasn't two, it was one prayer that we had. But Sydney Diocese didn't like the Mother Earth bit. So that was deleted, and I think it may still well be deleted in their prayer book. I don't know. So there we were sitting up there with my friend Gloria and Alex and some of the others, sitting up there watching the proceedings going on. And then I remember Bishop Arthur Malcolm getting up, and he said, if you don't accept this prayer, this is our prayer, the Aboriginal prayer. And so he mentioned, we might have to leave or something like that. And I thought, oh my goodness. And so anyway, after much discussion, and then there was one priest who, when it was passed, after they had the big debate, when it was passed, and one of the priests said, may this new prayer book, may this be the handmaid of the Lord. And so with that, when I heard that, and I started to shrink, I didn't want the ones who were up there from the media to come and know who was Lenore Parker. So I crept out of that place where I was, and I left Gloria and them upstairs, and I snuck down, and I went down to the toilet. And it was drizzling as on my way there. And I was crying at the time, of course, when it was passed. Everyone was crying. It was like as if this giant celebration of a giant corroboree was happening in heaven, and the tears were falling with this gentle rain that was coming down. And as I went into the toilet and I locked the door, and I thought, oh, no one's here, so I can really have a good cry. And that next minute there was a knock on the door. I let that knock go. Then I heard a voice after about the third knock, and they said, are you in there, Lenore? Is that you in the toilet, Lenore Parker? And I said, yes. They said, this is the ABC out here. And I thought, oh, you can't even go to the toilet. So that was how the prayer then was shaped and formed. Yeah. God of holy dreaming, great Creator Spirit, from the dawn of creation, you have given your children the good things of Mother Earth. You spoke, and the gum tree grew. In the vast desert and dense forest, and in cities at the water's edge, creation sings your praise. Your presence endures as the rock at the heart of our land. When Jesus hung on the tree, you heard the cries of all your people and became one with your wounded ones, the convicts, the hunted, and the dispossessed. The sunrise of your Son coloured the earth anew and bathed it in glorious hope. In Jesus, we have been reconciled to you, to each other, and to your whole creation. Lead us on, Great Spirit, and gather us from the four corners of the earth. Enable us to walk together in trust from the hurt and shame of the past into the full day which has dawned in Jesus Christ. Amen. So lead us on, Great Spirit, as we gather from the four corners of the earth. Enable us to walk together in trust from the hurt and shame of the past into the new day which has dawned in Jesus Christ. Amen. Amen.